Okay, hello. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming out in our snowstorm for today. I'm very happy to welcome James Jacobs with us again today for our third and final installment of our musical conversations with WETA and Levine. I've really enjoyed the series. I hope we can work together again. It's been a wonderful experience for our Levine community. Today, we're going to be talking about our concert coming up on Saturday, February 8th, right here at 7 p.m., called A Musical Offering to J.S. Bach. This concert features Sam Post, Ralitza Patcheva, and Carlos Rodriguez. They're going to be speaking today with James Jacobs, and they'll be talking about their upcoming concert. So without any further ado, here we go.
You haven't been eating scalloped potatoes for 3 days, like I have. You haven't been eating scalloped potatoes for 3 days, like I have. You haven't been eating scalloped potatoes for 3 days, like I have. You haven't been eating scalloped potatoes for 3 days, like I have. You haven't been eating scalloped potatoes for 3 days, scalloped potatoes, like I have. Like I have been eating, like I have potatoes, scalloped potatoes, scalloped potatoes, like I have been eating, like I have. Keep on going. Potatoes! 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 I've been eating so much potatoes! What am I gonna do with all these potatoes? Potatoes!
For 3 days, like I have.
Potatoes! Potatoes!
Like I have.
Potatoes!
Potatoes! Potatoes!
On the subject. Carlos Rodriguez. And yes, that was completely unrehearsed. Yes, we did not. I deliberately did not tell him anything about that because what I wanted to do was recreate what Johann Sebastian Bach had to go through on May 7th. Right, exactly. Yeah, I know. I got it. Well, actually, we're going to talk about all the different things you did. About on May 7th, 1747, Johann Sebastian Bach was summoned to Potsdam, the royal residence of Frederick the Great, where his son Carl Philipp Emanuel was working, and Frederick the Great had him improvise upon a theme that the king gave him, and we'll hear about that theme in a moment. But first of all, I want to talk about counterpoint, because what we've just done is demonstrate some certain basic principles of counterpoint. Now you might ask, what is counterpoint? Well, first of all, it's what you do every day. There you are watching an episode of Fleabag while also texting with a friend and telling them they've got to break up with that guy, and then you're also supposedly working your dissertation, and at the same time there's a cat video, and you're figuring out what to eat for dinner. That's counterpoint. You're doing a whole bunch of things, especially at the same time, on our digital reality. And what we just did in terms of demonstrating a musical counterpoint was first we sang a canon, right? We had the canon, or round, like Verajak, we sang the round, and then we sang that over an ostinato ground bass. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a repeating bum, 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 that 4-note pattern that you heard me bang out at the piano. And then we had lines of free counterpoint over that, which was me singing about potatoes, and everybody else doing little cadenzas over that. And finally, we turned it into a fugue. So you could say that what we just did could be called eine Kartoffelopfer, right? A potato offering. and I suppose, I guess, scallops isn't really counterpoint, right? Because it's just sort of homogeneous and sticky. So I guess poutine is probably better because it's got all these different elements. Anyway, the point being is, because it's contrasting, but the point being is that this is what Bach had to do. He was summoned, he was age 62 at this time, and this was the last journey he ever took outside of Leipzig. He had 3 more years to go, but he made the most of them. And what he did is he walked into the drawing. He was exhausted. He still had the dust of the road on him, and he was 62, and his eyesight was already failing, and he was already having mobility problems. But Frederick would not let him sleep or eat. He summoned him to show off the new keyboard instruments he had just gotten. And then he played for him a theme. Somebody go and play the royal theme. Thank you. Sam, post everybody. Now, you can already hear some differences between that and the potato round, right? Now, the potato round, with all respect to you, the potato round is relatively easy to make into a contrapuntal event because it sort of folds in on itself, and you can do various things. You can't really do much with that, and it seems that it was almost designed to humiliate Bach, and because Frederick the Great. Now remember, this was enemy territory, literally, for Bach. Frederick the Great had rolled in his Prussian army into Leipzig just a few years before, about 2 years before. And, and Bach's families, proud Saxons that have gone back all the way to Martin Luther. And now he was going to literally enemy territory with Frederick the Great and his newfound Enlightenment values. Frederick had no interest in music of the spheres or those Pythagorean ideals that Bach was all about. He was all about the new Rococo music, the new styles. And it looks like And for Bach, it was also sad because it seems like his son had also gone over to the dark side. Son Carl Philipp Emanuel, the second son. And Johann Sebastian Bach was the kind of father who made it clear that he had a favorite son, and his favorite son was his eldest, Wilhelm Friedmann. And Wilhelm Friedmann cracked under the pressure and led a miserable life, and I think was an alcoholic or something. He's just really sad. Carl Philipp Emanuel was the one who actually became very successful by doing something very different from what his father had done and working for this guy, Frederick the Great, who's only 2 years older than him, but already seemed like had kind of supplanted Johann Sebastian as a kind of father figure. And so, in fact, there are some scholars, including the subject of my last lecture here, Arnold Schoenberg, who thinks that it was actually Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach who wrote that theme and not Frederick the Great. Even though Frederick the Great was a fine composer in his own right, that theme has nothing in common with anything that we know Frederick to have written, whereas it has a lot in common with things that we know C.P. Bach to have written, and we think that this was a matter of the son, plotting with his new boss to humiliate Johann Sebastian. 62-year-old man who had done so much and was already a relic. Well, that 62-year-old had something to prove, and he proved it. Because what happened is Frederick the Great said, okay, make a 6-part fugue out of that royal theme that we just heard. And he made a 3-part fugue in the moment. And then he said, well, I can't do this extemporaneously. So he went back to Leipzig, and he composed a whole series of canons and 2 fugues based on this royal theme. And he called it ein musikalisches Opfer, a musical offering. And he engraved it on copper plates at his own expense, because he figured that that's what you do when you present something to the king. Spent a lot of money. There is no record that Frederick ever gave him a dime, ever replayed it, ever acknowledged receipt of anything of it, didn't care about it at all. But Bach had the last laugh because, first of all, his music is better known than either Frederick's or his own son's at this point. And also, he actually did make a profit because he sold copies of the musical offering that he had all printed at his own expense. So he showed that he still had it, and what's so remarkable about musical offering is that he showed what he had in so many different ways. He not only permutated this impossible theme in so many different ways that only a contrapuntal master could do, in terms of 10 different canons and a trio sonata that was deliberately written in his own son, Carl Philipp Emanuel's style, and yet he could do that too. And these 2 old-fashioned fugues that he called ricercare. Now, if you take a look at your sheet, you'll see the Latin inscription Regis Iuso Cantio et Reliqua Canonica Arte Resulta. The theme given by the king with additions resolved in the canonic style, right? And you take the first letter of each one of those words, and you get R-I-C-E-R-C-A-R, ricercar. He was playing a word game. And ricercar means to seek out. And it was also a term that composers had been using for well over a century at this point to refer to several kinds of compositions, fantasias, several kinds of contrapuntal compositions, including fugues, very complex fugues, usually based on fugues with long notes and so forth. So that's what this was about. So this was the basis of this assignment. He was meeting the king's challenge and taking it seriously, even though he knew perfectly well that the king didn't take it seriously at all. And it was filled with all the usual flowery rhetoric, which you do when you address monarchs. And he knew it was all to waste. And yet he did it just because he did it. And of course, we don't even, as I said, we don't even know if that theme is by Frederick the Great, because as Johannes Brahms once said, never criticize the composition of a king because you never know who may have written it. In any case, we're now going to hear Ralitza Patcheva play the thing that Bach played, improvised, and we can assume that this first Ritterkar, the one in 3 parts, was some sort of simulacrum of the one that he improvised before the king. You have the first part of this fugue on your sheets, Ritterkar, and it has been speculated that this is actually the first and possibly one of the most significant compositions written for the piano, as opposed to the harpsichord, because he was playing it on a forte piano, and there are certain articulation markings in it that he would never have used on a harpsichord. So this is Bach saying, yeah, I can keep up. I'm 62, I can keep up with the times. I can do a nice modern take for a modern instrument on an ancient form. We'll now hear Ritterkar in 3 parts. Now imagine the impact that must have had on that May evening, right? When basically C.P. Bach, his own son, and Frederick the Great were basically doing okay boomer to J.S. Bach, right? That's, there's like, yeah, okay, you can do a fugue on this. Let's see what you could do. And then they got that. And hopefully that shut them up. And then when Bach, now I want to talk about some of the elements. As you heard before, when Carlos improvised on the potato round, he turned the theme upside down, and he did some of the. I'm sorry, what? Some strettos. Yes, some strettos, and so I wanted to sort of get into a discussion of that, but I wanted you to get the visceral experience of that Ritchie-Carr first, to hear how Bach sought out and searched out all the different possibilities of these three themes. Because as you heard, it requires a pianist with two hands to basically to do three different voices, right? And it's so ingeniously composed that, first of all, it's very difficult to play, but at the same time, it's possible to play, as we just heard. And that's the genius of Bach, creating these three voices. So on the one hand, he's playing on the literal, this conversation, these three vertical lines that are somehow intersecting with one another. But there's also an implication there. Sometimes we hear fourth voices that actually aren't there, that are just implied. And he's playing with us. He's playing with acoustics. He's playing with music, and he's weaving this incredible tapestry. And when he went back and wrote a series of canons, he sort of took these. He decided to do simpler, sort of more elemental versions of these basically canonic exercises, where we can see the elements of this. He did this. He had done this a couple of years before when he wrote the Goldberg Variations, where he wrote a series of canons that went with them, and some of the variations themselves were that. So he sort of broke it down and had us hear, basically sort of draw back the curtain so we can see how the counterpoint is made. And right now, I want to hear the Canon Perpetuus with Sam Post and Ralitza. And this is, unfortunately, this is not on your sheet, but this is the first canon that he put in. And so in here, actually, why don't you guys explain how this is, the theme is in the bass, correct?
This time it's in the middle.
Oh, it's in the middle.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. And it's a conversation between the top line. And so because he can't do potato-like things with this melody, he uses it as the basis for which to create new melodies. So let's just hear first of all, the treble version of the counter melody. Okay, now can I hear, without the royal theme, just the treble and the bass in canon? The point is, he calls it Cantate Perpetuus because it could go on forever, right? Ideally, if left to their own devices, just like Carlos could go on forever if he left to his own devices, it could just keep on going. And But what's amazing about this is that that's not all, that would have been, as we say, Dayenu, that would have been enough if that had all been, but no. He actually puts on, in the middle of that, the royal theme. Let's hear it. So did you hear that royal theme in the middle? Yeah, that Bach could do amazing things. So we'll now go on to one that I believe you do have, which is this is one of the very few pieces where he actually specifies the instrumentation, which we'll specifically ignore, because he wrote it for. Actually, well, it's a little unclear. He said violin in unisino, and we're not sure whether that means two violins playing the canon or one violin playing the canon with the right hand of a keyboard. It could be either way. But in any case, we're going to hear it played on two pianos because that's what we got. And so let's break this down again. Now here, I think I'm right. It's the royal theme's in the bass. So play the royal theme for us. Actually, I just want to make sure we all know this royal theme. Let's hear it. That has to be the least singable melody I can think. I mean, it would be nice to put lyrics to it, but I don't think it'll work. Anyway, so let's hear let's hear the thing that he puts on top of it, just one voice, just without the canon, just dee dum bar bar da. It's the second one from the top. It's the third staff down. Yeah, I know not all of you. It says "Atu violin in unison." You all see that? So so you see, if you see it, it's two lines. So the bass line is that melody, bum bum bum, and the top ding bum 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 bum. But then you see a little sign on top of the second measure, right? And that means that's where the second voice comes in. So let's see if you can follow that along while they play it as this canon is realized. So you see how Bach solves the problem, sort of like, okay, well, I can't really make a canon with this melody, but I can use it as the bass to weave other melodies that you can make a canon out of. So it's very clever, that Bach. We're going to hear one more canon from the musical offering, and this one, the connection is a little bit more subtle. This is the canon 4, I believe. How many of you are involved with this? Two of us. Okay, fine. So, so this one is on the other side of this sheet. I think it's the last one, and it's one single line of music. And if you notice, at the beginning of this line, you see a whole bunch of stuff. You see both a treble clef, but with a treble clef one line lower than usual, so that the G is on the bottom line, and you see a bass clef, and you see two sets of key signatures. And what he meant to do by that is just sort of say, oh, well, actually, this can be played by both in two different octaves, and they're all, and he says it's in four parts. He doesn't completely spell out. We kind of have to do some work, in other words, in order to figure out how this works. This is called what they call a puzzle canon. In fact, if you see 2 lines up on one of the canons, it says quaerendo invenitis, right? You see that? Latin for seek and ye shall find. And in fact, there is, for that particular canon, we're not doing that right now, but there is, in fact, no definitive, we still don't quite know how that is realized. But for this 4-part canon, we have a pretty good idea, so we'll hear it.
And maybe we just say that this one is actually on an elaboration of the royal theme, because the theme of that canon is actually kind of a worked up royal theme. Like if we
Right. Yeah, it's an elaboration. So you might be thinking, who did Bach write this for, right? Is this, it turned out to be popular, so obviously people liked it. But is this a piece, people didn't play stuff like this in concerts. And he didn't really, as a textbook, it certainly works if you do the work, but he didn't really spell out exactly how we're supposed to use it as a textbook. It's sort of up to us. We have to seek and find. So this was his legacy. He wanted us to, they're puzzles, and he wanted us to delve into them and see all the different possibilities of that. And so you get the feel, in fact, I've actually heard a performance of the one that we just play, the Canon 4, where they actually turn the music upside down. It's like dee da 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 dee da da dee da, and it actually works. And and that's or you can start at the end and play it backwards in what we call retrograde inversion. And in fact, I think you should go and demonstrate some of the different possibilities of how you get. Yes, yeah. it's yeah, go.
Very problematic, but it works. You know what I mean? You hear the. Sorry,
No, go.
He was like, oh, those they think is different. You know what I mean? But in truth, you have this. There's three parts to it. So rising. Okay. Then you have some chromatic. And then tail, sign the contract. Right?
Yeah.
So I could make, what's great about this is I have various possibilities. Of course, it's like geometry in your head, you know, mathematics in your head. I'm sort of grabbing as I go along. This could be a harmony on the top. little potato.
It's fine. We don't.
But,
After
yeah,
Bach,
yeah.
we don't want to go back there.
I could have that, so that works very layers of harmony. So then what I do is like geometry, I see it, then. So if my line went like this, now I'm gonna see it. And then harmony.
And I imagine this is exactly what Bach wants us to do with this piece, that it's not really finished on the page. What's finished is us taking that. And then there's another, and then the next possible step beyond that is to write one's own fugue.
Yeah.
Segue.
Well, I didn't prepare a few, but I can do the.
Oh, I thought something that you wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not cute though, so.
Okay, well,
I'm gonna
it's,
say,
okay.
yeah.
So talk about, yes.
Sure, so, I feel, I guess, most at home writing music that, harmonically, texturally is quite similar to Bach music. My favorite composer, so, just a life of listening and paying attention and trying to glean lessons from that music, but then, more and more these days, just kind of being infected by more modern rhythms that weren't really hardly existed back in Bach's day, but are more popular now, more common in pop music, hip hop, etc. And so this piece kind of takes the inspiration from Latin tango rhythmic style, and combines that with kind of the spirit and counterpoint that we've been talking about in Bach's music. So, here it is.
Okay. So, now for the panel discussion with the three of you telling us whose idea this concert was, about this concert, this whole project, all of you guys. It's, Sam, I think this was your idea, is that right?
Yeah. So, yeah, the general idea for the concert was my idea. I've been playing with Carlos and Ralitza for a long time, as colleagues, mentors. Carlos and I actually get together about once a month these days, so that I can glean as much as I can from his masterful improvising. So we play together. He kind of coaches me, and then I listen to him, and
The
kind
idea,
of.
yeah, I think it started, can this be taught? In order to recreate, of course, he's an exceptional pianist and also a composer, exceptional composer. So I figured that at that time, pianists, keyboard players were composers as well. So not only they knew about the coordination, how to play the music, but they had to write also stuff. So I decided, because I always improvised since I was, I don't know, 5, 6. So I said, can this be really, can we recreate this sort of, can classical music be taught by, sorry, I join in, so I hope you don't mind me.
No, this is good.
About being, of course, I'm the, I'm the 61, I'm the Bach 61s, I'm not that old yet, but at least I felt like I needed to give something as a teacher, and of course these are all generations. So go ahead.
So Ralitza and I played. We played many concerts together, but a few years ago we did the Art of Fugue, the complete Art of Fugue by Bach, and so yeah, I mean for me Ralitza's just the best Bach player on harpsichord, on piano. As you heard.
And that's
And-
true, because I think he's the best. And I've been thinking this ever since he was like 13 or 14. I studied with the same teacher, and she was very particular about teaching Bach, Irena Orlov. Many of you probably know her. And when I heard Sam's first completely Bach recital when he was, I don't know, 13? How old were you? 12? Yeah. And he played the whole recital of Bach, and I was sitting, I didn't hear the real thing, I heard the recording, and I was sitting and crying, which I thought wasn't possible. I think Irena did things like this, and I thought she's exaggerating. I was sitting and crying in front of the TV thinking, how does he do that? Will I ever be able to do this? So thank you for saying that.
So yeah, we thought. I mean, my idea was to, like we did today, kind of, make a real life musical offering that not only we play the music of Bach, but also have
Morph into something into what's contemporary, what's of today. I mean, you heard a perfect example. You heard lots of polyphony and tango and rhythms that we sort of explored. So he took it up, with all these ideas and put it all together in very masterful way. So for me, it's wonderful that this concert also is sort of continues. Hopefully, we can develop something. This is something. I'm glad that this is real. We read it in text. It's almost like. It's like discovering how the pyramids was built or something like that. It's like, oh, that's what they were talking about. Harmonies and melodies and how to practice those things. So we do theme and variations. I give him, okay, let me give you a theme. And you make it a 2-part invention, then we talk about sequences. Oh, this is a way sequence, when you want to explore it and sequence, but all improvised, so we never know.
You have to work in the Fibonacci series.
yeah.
May I say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
And I think in a way with me being kind of the performer in this, I'm going to play a piece by Sam, and then I'm playing the Richard Carr in this concert. And I think at least, I don't know, we haven't exactly talked about this aspect, but part of the purpose of making that program was to once again represent how much Bach is ingrained in in music of all periods. And I think there is something slightly wrong with kind of when we first talk about music history, and especially, this piece, kind of old Bach being met by the king who didn't like, old Bach's music. And, when one reads more and more about this whole generational switch after Bach, it's actually very interesting to understand how much Bach was absolutely inseparable from the way we arrived at classicism. And actually, I think due to his sons. I think his sons, as much as, they must have had normal kind of father-son frictions, I think actually really did an amazing job of keeping their father's legacy and transforming it in whatever their musical language was. Because, Haydn wouldn't happen without or he would happen, but Haydn and Mozart considered C.P.E. Bach the father of all, and they did have some exposure to J.S. Bach's music, which had really, through the hands of C.P.E. Bach and Wilhelm Friedemann, gotten in, the aristocracy, and people had bought manuscripts, and so, and this completely formed the way they wrote. We kind of think sometimes that, there was Bach, and then he kind of disappeared, and then Mendelssohn brought him back, and then now, thanks God, we know, and he really was the greatest of all. He was the greatest because he just he impregnated that whole development that we live with right now. And I think what they're doing is really proving that it's not over, the relevance of what he was doing is still around. So I think that's...
Yeah, it's well, I've got mine. Yeah, it's basically music as architecture, right? The idea that music, is can be constructed out of all these strands. A couple of months ago, I did a lecture at Folger, Shakespeare, the library, because they were doing a production of not Shakespeare, but Peter Shaffer's play Amadeus, and there's a line in that play that I was thinking about because that is put in the mouth of Mozart, because Mozart was talking about how he writes ensembles in his operas where each person has a different thought in their head, and yet they all come out the same. It's like this weaving. I remember this quote, "I bet you that's how God hears the world. Millions of sounds ascending at once and mixing in his ear to become an unending music, unimaginable to us. That's our job. That's our job, we composers, to combine the inner minds of him and him and him and her, the thoughts of chambermaids and court composers, and to turn the audience into God." So that listening to all these different voices together making harmony gives you the sort of God's ear view of humanity, right? Like this height. And I think Bach thought in those ways, this idea of how he was creating this plane of perfection. He was creating this cosmic plane where all these things could weave together and create, and he was very steeped in theology and mathematics. In fact, apparently Wilhelm Friedman actually wanted to quit music and become a mathematician at one point. He was actually that was how much. So it's not an accident. And I think this is the idea of music as a science, the idea of music as, in a way, a belief system, as a universe unto itself, this creating this, as Pablo Close put it, this plane of beauty and order that we can all aspire to in our lives. And I think that's what gives us, I think, because we want to live inside that music. We want to live inside these perfect architectural spaces that Bach weaves. And that's, I think, what also makes it so universal, is because it's not, there was, I think, what distinguished the succeeding generation was this kind of almost class consciousness of the Baroque and the very ornamental, and sort of like, see how rich this sounds, how sort of, you can hear the wealth, you can hear, and in this music, all you hear is the music. And it's, and I think that's how he weaves it, because he takes it directly from the physics of music. So if you come to this concert, which is
February 8th, 7 p.m.
in this space,
In here, yeah.
yeah, you will hear.
You'll hear some of the stuff you heard tonight, although Carlos's whatever he does will be entirely different.
By the way, we're not going to do this tonight because we want to save it, but then he's going to take audience requests, right?
Yeah, we'll do one like the theme that you gave tonight. It'll be something that the audience will solicit a theme, and Carlos will do the same. Yeah. So you'll hear a bit more Bach. You'll hear the Richard Carr in 6 voices on 2 pianos. Ralitza will play a bit of harpsichord, I believe, maybe, to be decided. And then you'll hear a couple more of my pieces. I'll play another piece of mine, and Ralitza will play a prelude and fugue of mine as well.
But you know what you won't hear? You'll never hear that potato round again. And you'll never hear Carlos's amazing fugue upon that. See, this is the great thing about music. You know, it's in its moment. You know, you were here. This is a special moment that we created, and it's ephemeral. I'm glad that you all were here for that and to have that. Anyway, thank you all so much. And questions, by the way. Yeah.
Any questions? I see a hand.
Yes.
You mentioned that something was written both for the harpsichord and the piano, and I was a little surprised. I didn't realize there was already a piano.
Well, yeah, it was a very early.
Right. Yeah.
Someone else knows more about that.
Yeah, this had to do with the piano was actually, I believe, invented around the 1730s by Cristofori. Is that right? And you know, the idea that the hammers could strike the strings instead of pluck them. I mean, there had been the clavichord actually had done that before that, but that was like a little tabletop instrument, and this was a concert instrument. And the whole point of Frederick the Great is that, you know, he was up on the latest style, so he had some of the first forte pianos. And they called forte pianos because they could play both loud and soft, unlike the harpsichord where that's the note you get. So this is, and yes, this is the one example where Bach, we know Bach to have played one of those newfangled forte pianos in the company, you know, for the first time, and being introduced to a new instrument at age 62, and then writing for it.
Well, and he also, Zilberman was actually an organ maker, and he was a good friend, should we say, or at least somebody Bach knew really well. And so Zilberman had showed him prototypes of the fortepiano, and Bach had given an opinion, and Zilberman had made an improvement because of that, which is why we kind of know the story that Bach tried the fortepiano and said, no, I don't like it. But actually, he gave some suggestions of how it could be improved. So when he played it for the king, I mean, if you watch, there are a couple of movies out there about that. And of course, Bach kind of says, well, the king had like 10 of them or something. And, you know, and Bach said, oh, they're not really in tune, you know, you should do this and that, or, you know, in the film. But I think the interesting thing is that I don't think he owned the fortepiano, but he played the Richard Carr initially, or whatever, you know, and he played the 6-voice thing, but on a theme of his own for the king on a fortepiano. So he must have taken something from this, but then when he was composing at home and when he was writing the sonata for flute, he did write a basso continuo part, which is what people do on a harpsichord. So that's why we're kind of thinking, you know, which way to go. Should we feature a harpsichord in this performance, or, you know, we'll kind of keep thinking. So come and see what we decide.
Well, actually, it's interesting because in the trio sonata, in the basso continuo part, there's actually dynamics, which he would not have done if it was just a harpsichord part. So we don't know. I mean, there's lots of possibilities out there. It's very intriguing. Lots of more questions than answers, as usual.
This place where he says, basically, seek and ye shall find.
Right.
Go ye forth and improvise. Do you know of other places in Bach's compositions where he does that, where he basically invites the performer to go forth and seek and
Well, there is that famous portrait of Bach, right? That one that you all have in your mind. When you think of Bach, there's that famous portrait, and he has a little piece of sheet music in his hand. And what that sheet music is is one of these puzzle canons. Did you want to talk about that?
No, you do that, I'll just mention.
And that was one of the canons. Oh, it was actually in the 70s that Ellen Curtis, who I had the privilege of studying with, made the discovery of this manuscript of Bach's Goldberg variations, which had at the last page these 14 canons. And I was actually at the world premiere of those 14 canons in the 70s, after like over 200 years after they were actually composed. And they're basically written in the same spirit as these canons for the musical offering. They're these little, they're kind of like acrostics, right? They're like, you know, the puzzles that you do, or crossword puzzles, and you figure them out. And it's an ancient thing. I mean, this goes back to medieval times. Michaud was famous for writing, he wrote a piece that was in a circle. And you played, and it was this beautiful thing because it was a poem about a circle, and it was about love, and it was all very tied together, but it was also this ingenious contrapuntal masterpiece where it all, you know, where the voices enter in different ways, and it was all very symbolic, and so there was an ancient tradition, you know, musicians showing off, right, and indulging in this sort of, you know, these cryptic ideas, and this is sort of a language, and Bach was just playing with this at this, you know, ancient game, and you know, basically taking this ancient game and bringing it into the present, which is exactly what you guys were doing.
And he was kind of amazing at that, and I think he used it as a teaching tool too. So I think, you know, he had, I mean, it's kind of a fact that he just couldn't get enough of canons because, and one of his sons comments on this, I think C.P. Bach, that the moment he heard the theme, he would immediately start working out in his head what could be done with it. And it's funny how after the Goldbergs, you know, which is 30 variations of which half are canons, he does yet another 14, you know, as if he can't stop. But the way they are written, the way you see it on your sheet, you know, we as Bach students, let's say, or his sons, we would be supposed to figure it out. That would be the delight, so to say. And I can't. So I'm very grateful to one of his students, Kernberger, who actually, you know, wrote it out. And that's how we're playing it. So maybe Sam can figure it out, but like if I really worked at it, I might, but it's not part of my skill. And it was part of their skill at the time when Bach was teaching. And some people were amazing at it like him, and other people could somewhat do it.
No, we really have to salute Kernberger.
Keyboard and composers, you know, they were keyboard players were, I think, were musicians, you know, and musicians in the way that they had to compose as well as play the instrument. And I think now you see pianists and you see composers and you see, but I think overall they were supposed to, I hope, you know, from what I think, and that's why is wonderful because of course Sam is a composer, so when I say, okay, now play the fugue, okay, here we go, the second theme, okay, now what you're going to do is sequence in modulation so that you have finished the case. Don't just sequence until you find the next arrival point, and then, okay, then we go. Now try to invert it, and sometimes it's been really amazing, you know, to sort of experiment with this thing. It's fabulous.
And when I think about that, I think that, you know, now you can push a button and that flips it over. You know, there are computers that do that, but of course there are computers who wouldn't have thought to do that if Bach had said, "Hey, this is a cool thing to do," right? I mean, there's like you would wonder what Bach would do had he had a computer, but he didn't need one, clearly. Yes. Yes, please.
The big statue outside the church where Bach was choirmaster in Leipzig doesn't show him with a piano or harpsichord, but with an organ.
Right.
And I just wonder what challenges there are between his organ composition or on the score versus using a piano or harpsichord. And secondly, I just wondered, in a couple weeks, this group called Dunedin is coming.
Oh, sure,
to
from
Washington.
Scotland, yeah.
And I just wonder, who are the preeminent, besides the three of you, the preeminent specialists in Bach, either on the keyboard or as an ensemble, as this Dunedin?
First of all, about the organ, it is known that Bach, he was one of the first joggers Apparently, he kept in shape. You know, he ran for exercise, and you can tell because he wrote these amazingly elaborate things for the pedals, and he wrote a couple of things for pedals alone. No,
Well, I can attest that running does not help play the organ with the pedals. It's very difficult.
It helped for Bach, but of course, it also helped because Bach, they had these certain kinds of shoes. I think that actually it's funny because the German word for glove is Handschuhe, and then these galoshes that you wear for the organ pedals are called Fußhandschuhe. But anyway, that has nothing to do with anything. But yes, Bach was the organ. I mean, you could do so many different things with all the registers, and he certainly thought in terms of being able to do more things. I mean, because he had 3 different voices, but I don't think. But he thought, in different terms. And, the organ can sustain notes in a way that a harpsichord can't. But the way he wrote for a harpsichord, he played with the resonances of each note so that you hear the illusion of a note sustaining. So that even if you play one note in the bass, every note on top of it will make that bottom note continue to sustain. So he was very aware of the acoustic properties of the instruments he was writing for, which is why it's, you do lose something, you both lose and gain something when you hear it all on the piano. But you said you're an organist?
No, I'm not. I mean, I have played occasionally organ a little bit, but I've tried to learn to use the pedals, but without success, I have to admit.
And actually, let me make a point that I say earlier, because now that I'm thinking, not just keyboard players, violinists were supposed to also compose, and singers. It was the musician's job was they could perfect their individual instrument. But at the same time was music overall. So I would imagine that all these things they lived, they practiced. I would imagine I was not there. I was not there, but I would imagine that they would practice also how to sequence, how to improvise in the violin, how singers will make ornaments. So there's also these layers of how to write music, and I think that's what's so exciting. That at least in this concert, that's what we're trying to do. So train into the pop world as well. With pop, why not? There were and besides dances were. We think of Baroque as something classical, but if you think of Sarabande was a pop dance, a folk dance from Mexico that was, transported to France. So you have all these dance qualities, rhythmic qualities. So that's the tango and all the stuff as well.
But also, Bach had a sense of he knew how to create counterpoint with whatever he had. And so, for example, when he wrote the cello suites, he made the instrument, which couldn't do a lot of double stops, have a conversation with itself, right? And I'm just playing one instrument, and yet you can already get just from that little bit that I sort of poorly played the idea of 3 different universes going on, right? And the fact that you could hear that, even poorly played on a recorder, and you could still hear that all the contrapuntal texture just from that, I think is a testament to that.
And on the other spectrum, when he writes all this music, that's let's say 3 parts. You could, in such a masterful way, you could add a 4th part, or you could improvise a 5th part,
and he did that.
It can synchronize exactly because he knew exactly how harmonic it was moving, but at the same time linear how it was able to. So it's making, it's building upon, blocks upon blocks upon blocks.
But for example, in the Art of Fugue, he writes a fugue in 3 parts, but then he makes a version for 2 pianos where he just adds another part. But anyway, to answer your question about great performers. Well, let's see. Well, the Dream Day concert is wonderful, but there's lots of great people out there.
If you're thinking about, you're asking more about keyboard players that.
How do you pronounce it? Doomden?
Yeah, it's they're from Scotland.
I haven't
believe,
heard,
yeah,
yeah. I have to go hear them. I think at this point a lot of people are playing Bach. I mean, I think I think you all know, for pianists there was a big difference after Glenn Gould started playing Bach, because suddenly people realized, oh, you can make a whole concert program of Bach. So I think that definitely changed the game a lot. I would say that Andras Schiff, Angela Hewitt are people who love, big Bach concerts nowadays. They would tend to go, and they definitely create something very special with this. And then there are kind of younger people like Piotr. There is a Polish.
There's these two guys.
So I would say nowadays there are a lot of layers of Bach performers you can go to, and now I think anybody who, I think Murray Pariah had a stage when he played a lot of Bach. So people are now very interested in kind of exploring their own aspect of how Bach is played. I think we've been through kind of a stage where before Glenn Gould, one would say, oh, we were through a stage where, Bach was played legato and with pedal, and then we were doing all these things that were inappropriate that we didn't know about before the early.
Rosalind Turek.
What was that?
Turek, Rosalind.
Well, Rosalind Turek, yes, but there were the single cases of people kind of challenging convention, but you would say, oh, but convention was all wrong before early music kind of started being played more, and we would learn. The interesting thing is that when you do start learning from musicians like harpsichordists and people who are steeped in the early music tradition, you very often get to a point where they say there are no definite answers. There are things you better do and there are things you better don't do, but from there on, make up your mind, And so I think now the current kind of performance situation is that people are not afraid to try different things. There is not like something that's totally wrong or totally right. So you could go many ways.
I remember going to this amazing Mozart conference where Robert Levine just completely improvised a cadenza, and there was a baby crying, and he somehow worked that into one of his cadenzas. It was an amazing piece. But at the very end of the conference, they said, well, we could keep on talking, but I guess really a conference like this doesn't end with a great cadence, but like one of those pop records where it sort of fades, repeats, and fades, and that sort of thing, and you just sort of take that with you. And I think that's what's going to happen now, is that we're just going to take this a sense of the infinity of music with us. Thank you all so much for coming.